All right. Welcome back to Sober Minded Podcast, episode something with Jamie Kimmel here today.
I was looking at the screen. It looks like Chase aged horribly.
Yeah. Sorry for the delay. We recorded a week ago and we lost it due to technical difficulties. So we have a delay and we're re-recording, and Chase is not available for this one. So it's just me with a guest. So let's open with a prayer. Dear God, thank you for the opportunity to have a platform and try to speak truth and thank you for this nice weather we've been having. Thank you for getting us through the work days, and I pray that you'll continue to be with us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So this is Jamie Kimmel, my father-in-law, someone I consider a very good mentor, a lot of wisdom, practical wisdom. On our last episode, we did a preliminary covering on truth, and that's what we're going to kind of center this episode on. We always end up going into the weeds a little bit, but it's always relevant. So it's all right if we do that. So thanks for coming on, Jamie. I appreciate round number 2.
No, I think maybe the second one will go better.
Yeah, we'll see.
I actually meant to study this time. I didn't.
Oh, yeah. Well, I wrote down a few more questions.
Oh, good.
So it should stay a little bit more grounded.
Steer the conversation.
Yeah. If you wanted to open up with how you define yourself, like what categories are your identity, I think it might sound like a funny thing to do, but I think it's relevant because it helps relay your priorities in your life, and
Right.
that gives people a bigger picture on what you're pursuing, what matters to you.
Right. There again, I didn't study or think of a way to better enunciate this, but first of all, I'd say Christian. I think obviously that has the most eternal consequences. Secondly, husband, father, American, world citizen, not in a weird one world order way, but we do have a responsibility for stewardship and tending the world that God's given us. Obviously, that's focused inside of our own country the most.
Yeah.
We do have influence in a larger sphere, so that's kind of how I break down my identity.
Cool.
No pronouns are real important to me or
Yeah, no.
any of those things. So.
Something I was thinking about when I was writing down questions, and I was thinking about this one was, do you think it's fair to say having your identity as a Christian at the top of that, everything that follows, if it were to contradict with that first category, you should reevaluate that subcategory?
I think that's exactly why you put things in order, and specifically that order is, like I say, eternal consequences to the Christianity.
Yeah.
Everything else have generational consequences, moral consequences, things like that. But the Christianity is, and just being a follower of Jesus, eternal consequence, and what we were created to do. So, yeah, I think if any of the things below that contradict or oppose, you reevaluate the second, not the primary.
Yeah. Which I think that's where a lot of people have gotten in trouble, is the subcategories they've made to lead the primary categories.
Right. No, it's easy to do.
And I think it is kind of healthy. I don't think we think about it too much in our day-to-day, but having that hierarchy of priority and category, when you're approaching one of the subcategories, you can almost just go to the next category up and say, okay, how does that category dictate that? And then how does that category dictate that one? Like, for example, when you're approaching work, how should I approach work? Well, how should I approach it in a way that's beneficial to my marriage? And then, okay, well, how does keeping it beneficial to my marriage, what does that look like in line with my faith?
Right. Yeah, I really love backcountry hunting. How is that going to affect such and such above that?
Yeah.
And, all these things, whether it's hobby, occupation, interest.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's true. Just look back one or more of the priorities and see how it affects things.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. And I would agree. Those are categories that I also self-identify with, I guess, in that same order too. It's beneficial, and I think it's good to have things kind of simple, I think we can get in
linear.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Of okay, this is related to this, which is related to this.
Right. I need it to be kept simple.
Yeah, me too. So, on the topic of truth, how do we find truth? How do you find truth in life?
So last week when we were talking about it, I jumped, right to, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the logos of the Trinity, and from that logic, comes our truth and everything else. But I was thinking during the week, it wouldn't hurt, because there's definitely levels and regions of truth. So I had looked up on my way over here the American Dictionary of the English Language, and this is, I think it's Webster's Dictionary, 1828. So like anything else, the Webster's Dictionary has become more and more postmodern or post-Christian as it's gone along. And so I kind of like the 828, because there's not necessarily such a thing as looking back to the good old days or back when things were better, but closer to Noah Webster actually editing his dictionary, and him being one of the founding fathers that was a very, very strong Christian, and everything he did was defined by his Christianity. I like this, and you'll see as we read down through it for some of the specifics why that is. So it says truth, noun, conformity to fact or reality, exact accordance with that which is or has been or shall be. The truth of history constitutes its whole value. We rely on the truth of the scriptural prophecies. My mouth shall speak truth, Proverbs 8:7. Sanctify them through thy truth. Thy word is truth, John 17:17. So, second definition, true state of facts or things. The duty of a court of justice is to discover the truth. Witnesses are sworn to declare the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Number 3, conformity of words to thoughts, which is called moral truth. Shall truth fail to keep her word? Veracity, pure from falsehood, practice of speaking truth, habitual disposition to speak truth, as when we say a man is a man of truth. A correct opinion, fidelity, constancy, the thoughts of past pleasure and truth, honesty, virtue, on down through the list. It sounds more like a Sunday school lesson to us today than a dictionary definition. But if you lose your biblical worldview, then it becomes a lot harder to define truth. Mm-hmm. And at some point when your compass is broken, all of a sudden there is no truth, or truth is relative. So that's why I like going back to this, and
yeah, it's a lot more straightforward.
It definitely shows where they're coming from.
Yeah. I think I wrote down different categories or different ways where you can find truth. With obviously for us, and I will talk about that biblically being the top, being that top category on where we go to find truth, because being God's word, speaking truth to us, speaking how directing our lives, and historical, because I think it's important. We say we read history, we study history so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past,
Right.
And I think that's a good place to find truth. When you look into the past history of humanity and you say, oh, they did this over and over and that failed, therefore, how can I derive some kind of truth from that?
Right.
I think that's a place that you can look innately, like within us, which gets a little bit blurry, but it along the lines of when it's in sync with the Bible. For instance, morals, and some of them are more clear cut than others. For instance, murder is bad,
Right.
where that's, if we were strictly animals, there wouldn't necessarily be anything wrong with murder.
What would differentiate man from a deer or a mouse or anything else?
Exactly.
Right.
Where why do we continue to care for old folks once they've stopped giving back to society?
Or why is it wrong to kill a baby before it's actually out breathing air? I mean,
Exactly. So those morals, which again ties back into the biblical, using the Bible as a guide for those, because our morals can be skewed based on outward influences.
Right. Yeah, like the old proverb about your conscience has sharp corners, and if you go against it often, you'll wear those corners off and it won't bother you so much.
Yeah.
So
And then physically, which I guess is more science based, like
right.
If you throw a ball, it will fall to the ground, whether or not you believe in gravity.
Yeah, gravity, entropy, all these things, the laws of science.
Yeah. Yep. So I think that those were just different categories that I was thinking about that can give us a bigger grasp on different aspects of truth. I think they all tied together. Well, they do. They should. But again, with the Bible being that number one resource. So why should we trust the Bible to be the giver of truth?
Because it is God's inspired word. That's going to be where its authority has to derive from. If it's just a special book that's made it through generations relatively unaltered, then, cool, it's a special book. But, we have Don Quixote that's sold a lot of copies and been translated for 500 years. That doesn't make it a reference where we go to for truth. Interestingly enough, Don Quixote has a lot of cues about perceived reality versus actual reality, so maybe that one's not an awesome example. But no, the divinity of the Bible is why we should give it credence, not its age or its longevity, whatever you want to call it.
And why do you believe that the Bible is divinely inspired?
Part of that comes from the fact that it couldn't have coalesced the way it has and maintained the way it has. That we have no other examples of that. And also it says it is. And at some point you're going to have to choose a tenet for your belief. And so
Yeah, whether that be religious or a religion that says there is no religion.
Yeah, exactly. Which obviously the irony is thick.
Yeah.
But yeah, at some point, ultimately, that has to be a choice that you do believe that.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's like a moral relativity or anything. It's just I do believe that the Bible is God's word, and from there it derives its authority.
Yeah, I agree. When I was like in eighth grade or whatever, when I was trying to figure out why, like whether or not I was a Christian, I guess,
Right.
like why should I believe in it and everything? I went down the apologetic rabbit hole on
Right.
all the scientific data, and there's all the conflicting thing, or like a mainstream source will say this and then a secondary source will say this, but it really is fascinating when you look at, there's different categories in the historical relevance, like you said, for it to come together,
Right.
for it to be written over thousands of years and yet have this meta narrative going through the entire thing that
Right.
ties it together. Even within each individual story, having callbacks here and there, all weaving itself together.
The archaeological and scientific record never contradicting it. Sometimes we think it does throughout history
Until we find-
and then we find out, oh, we were wrong, it was right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly. And the amount of how many tens of thousands of manuscripts have they found?
right.
Like
All
first,
over the world.
first source
Yep.
documentation that has still been preserved, and they haven't found any reasonable discrepancies where
Right.
maybe an adjective is different, or but nothing that changes the message.
Right.
And for that to happen, that's pretty darn crazy.
Yeah, and that's exceptional. That's divine.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. So I'd gone down that rabbit hole, but it was when we were doing a worship service, and I got tangibly feel like the Holy Spirit there, as almost wacky as it sounds, but it's just true.
Right.
And that's when it became like my own faith. And I think being raised in the time that we are, we're kind of hardwired to want to analyze things
Oh, for sure.
from a scientific standpoint, to the point where we can tend to discredit the spiritual aspect of it, which we're not supposed to, but at least that's what I had found myself doing. But
Right.
I think it's wildly important to it,
Yeah, in developed countries, when you look at our technology and our command of the physical world, obviously medical eludes us so often, and these other things are still beyond our grasp. But the advances we've made, the technology we have, it's definitely easy to discount the experiential and just the spiritual. And it's not so much seeing a demon behind every bush, like a third world shaman might, but he may well be tuned in to something that we're blowing right past because of our focus on the tangible.
I agree. Kind of a sidebar. Do you think our culture the pendulum is swinging on that front? Because it seems to me like it kind of is, with psychedelics becoming more mainstream in clinical
Right.
studies, and
The mind, the power of the mind, the power of the spirit, it's so far beyond our grasp, and it's possible. This is just me wildly theorizing, but it is very possible that we've lost grasp of that with our modern, has to be scientific, has to be analyzed, and we might have some catching up to do in that department. I have a modern distrust of psychedelics, We didn't have the coming of age ceremonies and the things like that in the Western culture for hundreds of years. Um, I'm intrigued, but that being said, I don't want to approach it in a recreational or necessarily even a spiritual way, because I worry about the unknowns and letting your mind be taken over or altered by something. But I'm very intrigued by the medical possibilities, and you know yeah, I all that to say yes.
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree with you. Um, that's just something I'm curious about, because we can tend to get in our own almost echo chamber where you listen to a few different sources,
Right.
and then you think, oh, everything's changing because these sources are changing. But I don't know if that's just the sources that I tend to listen to on podcasts and stuff, but it does seem like, at least to me, would you agree that the pendulum seems to be swinging away from more, to use the overused word, like woke culture? It seems to me to be starting to swing back the other way.
My impression would be, yeah, it's swinging back when you're Joe Rogan's, your Russell Brand's, your Jordan Peterson's, your David Goggins's, when those guys have the audience that they do and they're speaking, there's some pretty open minds there. They're obviously not far right conservatives or anything like that. But when they're saying, hey, evaluate things on their own merit and not just because that's what a woke culture says you should do, it feels like a pendulum shift. Like you say, it could be an echo chamber, and that we've sought out, like-minded people. But to me, it feels like a cultural shift.
What do you think we should be wary of as the pendulum swings? Because I don't think we want it to be all the way either way.
Right.
Left. I mean, we're so ingrained in America with left or right, but
exactly.
But if we're speaking on American culture, then I guess that is relevant.
Right. Anytime humanism raises mankind above the status that they should have according to God, we were created to fellowship and be there as not a helpmate, but for someone for God to fellowship and interact with, and to serve Him. And anytime humanism elevates us above that. That being said, if you elevate, Gaia, or you make the earth a goddess or a thing to be elevated above mankind, and mankind subduing and properly stewarding the earth, that's bad. So, that balance between mankind being more important than other parts of the creation, in that he's supposed to steward and care for the creation, and yet he was created by God, to be that companion role.
Yeah.
Not equal to God, but we are a triune being, along the lines of, or a picture of, the way God is a triune being.
Perhaps a supplement to God on earth. Would that be,
I don't know if supplement is the word I would choose, but I see where you're going with it.
Yeah, I guess that is, because on both ends it does seem to be humanistic, where if you look at it on the left side, left and right, it's all about your truth, and whatever you want is, your want in above all else, above other people's wants. But then again, on the right side, if it's taken too far to the extreme, you can become like where Joe Rogan becomes almost just obsessed with your physical performance, like Goggins, I guess.
Right.
Where
Yeah,
his
exactly.
physical performance has taken priority over everything else in his life.
Right.
And that's humanistic as well.
Yeah, exactly.
That's something Chase and I have covered multiple times, is how we should approach the gym, which is good. You want to be in shape. It's the same as, in my mind, it's the same as doing pistol drills.
Right.
You want to be. I keep seeing that mouse running on that.
I keep seeing you look over there. It's like, what's so interesting? Got to have a mouse in the woodpile.
Yeah. But I in my mind, it's like doing pistol drills,
Right.
or just rifle drills. You want to be as effective as possible for those around you.
I do pistol and rifle drills to supplement or to replace some of my time in the gym.
Yeah.
So I'm more effective that way.
Yeah. But you also want to be able to, if need arises, have the physical ability, not necessarily to take out some jujitsu guy,
Right,
but to
Well, just to survive and be a
Yeah.
healthy human being, so that you're there for your family. and
Exactly.
You can accomplish your job and everything else. So
Yeah.
you shouldn't let your physical go completely.
Yeah.
I was making a joke more than anything, as far as it's a lot more effective to shoot something and
Oh yeah.
not have to grapple with it.
Yes, I agree. What are specific truths that you think are important for young men to know and follow? Like, what should young men be aware of as they approach life?
Obviously, you're starting off, trying to build your spiritual house, personal relationship with God, your knowledge of the scriptures. You build that foundation, and hopefully you've built that foundation through childhood and up into young adulthood, and so you're pretty well squared away, by the time you reach that young man status. Obviously, like you say, you have that physical need. Your body's growing and strengthening in that time, and the better physical foundation you build, the better off you'll be as you age. You see a lot of people that never get strong, and it's not easy to get strong as you get older.
Yeah.
Mentally, intellectually, never stop learning. So it's so easy. I've never been a big video game player, but I understand the appeal of it. And you see so many guys just get lost in gaming, and to a certain amount, you're accomplishing something. It's a pseudo accomplishment, but you are, working your way through a thing. So that's part of what appeals to, I think, the male psyche specifically, is we like to build and make and conquer, and now we're doing that virtually.
Yeah, it's not a tangible thing
Right.
that you can look back on and say, I built this. It's
Right.
something, I beat that video game, and a year from now, it won't matter at all.
Right.
Or a week from now.
Exactly. And honestly, what could you have accomplished with all the umpteen hours you threw at that?
Oh, man.
Now, there's interaction with other players. I mean,
Yeah.
there's relationships to be built. It's not all bad. Some games are more all bad than others, I'm sure. But anyway, so that there again, it's a balance thing. But work on building those tangible skills. Obviously, if you live in a big city, woodcraft and things like that aren't necessarily going to come naturally. It's not readily available. But just try to be that well-rounded person would be something I would suggest. Learn how to make things with your hands. Learn how to do basic mechanicking. Just try to be not a man's man in such, a John Wayne, throw the kid in the pond to make him learn to swim way, but, be reasonably well educated, never stop learning, be fruitful with your time,
Yeah.
be well rounded in your knowledge as far as capabilities, working with your hands, working with your mind.
Yeah.
So that's my off the cuff impression of, the things to develop.
Nice. I would agree. How should men approach work?
Balance. I like my chosen field of work, so it's easy for me to spend more time doing it than possibly I ought. But it comes down, your spiritual life, your family life, wife, and then kids, and then civic duties and work. We're down there, third, fourth, fifth, however they start to break down after family. So you always, the Bible says everything you do as unto God. Do your best at it, do it well, do it to the best of your ability. That being said, don't let it consume you either. I guess if you need a hobby and if it's not interfering with family life, work isn't a bad hobby.
Yeah.
But that could just be me justifying.
Yeah. A well-paying hobby.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing is you need to find and pursue a job that will provide a standard of living that you and your family can agree on and is sufficient. That being said, don't chase, just dollars.
Yes.
A certain amount of fulfillment. And, some people, 9 to 5 in a inside office would kill them. And, they need to be able to see that tangible thing, whether it's building a building or pouring a concrete slab or trimming a tree or, they need to look back at the end of the day and say that truck runs or that part is whittled out of a piece of metal because I did that.
Yeah.
And if they were just stacking papers or answering phones, they wouldn't necessarily have that. Now other people, crave that interpersonal relationship, and getting to talk to 80 different people on the phone during the day thrills them, and it provides a sufficient living. So,
Yeah.
the spiritual gifts, I think, really play into that. God's designed each of us individually, and if you're talented at something, and if you do something well, if it comes naturally, you should probably cultivate that to a certain extent in either a hobby or your occupation, because you were probably gifted to be able to do that.
Yeah. Like
So-
my spiritual gift is speaking in tongues, so I'm an electrician.
Exactly. Sometimes when you grab those two wires, it just pours out of you.
So when speaking to young men, say high school young men, or just graduated, what would your guidance be on pursuing a career path? Because I think that's important. I think that's something that oftentimes gets lost, is we can end up pursuing jobs, not necessarily careers, but the flip side is you can pursue a career to your detriment if it ends up being the wrong career. But how would you advise approaching that? Because you want something that you enjoy, but to some extent you're not always going to enjoy it.
Yeah, work is still going to be work.
Yeah.
And so many people I know have pursued their hobby into a career or a job, and then now they hate their hobby and they don't want to go to work. So now they've lost both things. I'd say pick a job that sufficiently provides for the standard of living that you need and that you can stand doing, and try it some. You're in high school, you don't need to commit. You can try some firefighting during the summer. You can try, intern at a bank. I mean, you can try things that appeal to you. That being said, if you go to work at McDonald's and you really enjoy the people interaction and you pursue that up into managing a store or owning a few franchises, that's awesome too.
That's something it blows my mind on the other side of it, that we make juniors and seniors in high school choose to commit $100,000 to a career that, not talking bad about high schoolers, but you don't know who you are fully. You don't know
Right.
what you want. That first year outside of high school, you grow so much.
Right.
It kind of baffles me that we don't encourage, okay, wait a year, grow, get out of that high school environment where everything is fabricated and you're
Right.
around friends and, before you commit to tens of thousands of dollars.
Right. I would never say that no one is going to come out of high school. Maybe you've wanted to be a doctor since you were 6. You've gotten your prereqs out of the way during high school with, college credits while you were in school, and you dive right in. There are kids that have this very definite career path, but I think it's criminal to tell somebody they need to go to college just because that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so whether it's a trade school, whether it's an internship, whether it's an apprenticeship, there's so many possibilities. If you want to pursue at your leisure an art history degree because you love art history, wonderful. Keep learning, do that. But absolutely don't go into crippling debt to do that.
Yeah.
Do that as you can afford it while you work a productive job. Unless you have, is the mouse back?
Yeah. I just keep seeing it dart across.
That's funny. Anyway, yeah, the college debt thing is a real hot button. It's not just because I listen to Mike Rowe a lot.
Yeah.
I probably listen to him a lot because I agree.
Yeah. Well, even before I was listening to him, just being on the other side, and I know, like, Abby knew what she, it's good
Right.
for her. She
Yeah, she
knew what
had a
she wanted to do.
direction and-
I went through like 4 different things
Right.
before I settled on something that I wanted to pursue career-wise. And I mean, life situations changed what you pursue. But it's just wild to me because I distinctly remember, like, it wasn't that long ago for me, that first year out of high school, you grow so much.
Right.
Where it's, where I was a year ago, I don't even want to pursue the same things. Imagine if I had already spent $75K or whatever,
Yep.
I don't know. And like you say, like, some people that works out well for.
Right.
But I think the almost peer pressure.
It's not even peers. It's our elders
Yeah.
pushing, whether it's their personal status or whether they're trying to make a quota and enroll, a certain number of kids or, commissions on loans. I mean, it's awful.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I feel like the pendulum is swinging on that.
Yeah.
I feel like the apprenticeships, internships, those kinds of things are really gaining ground, and people are seeing the value in actually having a tangible trade or a tangible skill.
Oh,
and
yeah.
being
Well,
able
even like a real life example, talking to a journeyman, he started the apprenticeship roughly 10 years ago or so, and they almost didn't have a class that year because there was only 5 guys
Right.
that were going to do it.
Right.
And now, just my class, we have 20 some, and on the list, allegedly what I'd heard, there's at least 30 people on the list trying to get accepted into the apprenticeship.
That's good.
So yeah, I would agree. That's a tangible evidence of the pendulum swinging in my book.
Yeah, for sure.
And the fact that the government is giving out grants now for the pre-apprenticeship, where you're even going to high school kids and saying, hey, if you want to check out an electrical career, they can come down, and if they end up wanting to pursue that and they make it through the pre-apprenticeship, they get like $500 scholarship,
Right.
which covers a semester.
Right.
So,
RCC has given, a welding hood to, the kids in high school that have decided to enroll in that.
oh
And,
yeah,
there's different things that are starting to build a practical
yeah,
life path instead of, I swear it's not even humanism. It's a weird. Uh, I don't even have the terminology for it, but just a narcissistic outlook to think that everybody has to follow a particular path, and that path is some kind of a 4-year degree.
oh yeah.
Like I say, not in the least bit knocking the 4-year degrees.
No,
Continuing education, whether it's organized or self-taught, is a must. But it's exciting, and it's heartening to see it coming back.
I could be incorrect. I just thought of this. Do you think we can, in part, attribute some of that to the institution of a standardized, like K through 12 schooling, where everyone goes through the exact same schooling? It's cookie cutter. And again, like I'm not dissing on the American education system at all, but it does, in my mind, make sense that all they're doing is extending it 4 years out,
Right.
and making hundreds of thousands of dollars out
Right.
of it.
And that's where I feel like it's criminal, is
Yeah.
to be putting these kids who really, your brain is not fully formed at
No.
17 if you
No.
sign this letter to say, yeah, I'm going to go to an Ivy League school and pay 80 or 100,000 a year or more, and in debt myself forever.
When allegedly you can't bankrupt on that debt either.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's like the one debt you can't
That you're stuck with.
bankrupt on.
And I don't advocate people, defaulting on their thing that they said they would pay
No,
back.
but it is a little interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Who is really benefiting here?
Yeah.
It's typically not the student. But back to your original question, yeah, I can see the standardized K through 12, just naturally rolling into an extended. But there again, whether it's the pendulum swinging or what it is, nowadays I'm seeing a lot of schools where during high school, especially the last couple of years, you can work toward your associate's degree, and then you come out with either a certificate or your associate's, because a lot of those classes are just repeat.
Yeah.
So why review when you're 19 and 20 if you can take the class once and that's sufficient. As far as, yeah, I could see what you're saying as far as it just being a natural extension, but honestly, you should be able to. You look at generations of people going up through the 6th grade, up through the 8th grade, getting their basic reading, writing, arithmetic. At that point, you have all the tools you need to continue your education on your own, to focus it on, specific areas that you're interested in or you need for your work. It could definitely be scaled back. Lizzie and I were talking the other day. She was frustrated because she hadn't learned anything in a class. And I told her, well, by the nature of classroom education, you're basically teaching, and I just pulled these statistics out of thin air. It's a guesstimate, but you're teaching to the middle 60%. The talented and gifted 20%, and the 20% that are struggling because of, whatever reason they're having a hard time learning, they're going to be left behind. It's you kind of have to teach to the middle.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
it's not talking bad about teachers. It's just
it's
fact.
just, you can't teach at the rate that would take the highest achieving kids and push them down the path, because you're going to leave everybody else, and you can't go all the way back and try to catch the first 20% up in a consolidated classroom setting, because that's going to leave the other 80% behind. So yeah, it's And obviously now you've got special programs, and you catch those up and you push those ahead and everything else. But yeah, it's limited to, and that's where homeschooling, if it works for a family, shines, because you can customize. You go as fast or as slow as necessary.
Yeah, and you can kind of tailor it to teach your kids or give them the opportunity to look at possible career paths,
right,
and experiment, whereas they might not have had that opportunity in a classroom.
Right.
Like I think of with Nate and with Luke.
I was just going to say, when your high schoolers that have part-time jobs are saying, I can't miss work, I learn more there than I do in school, then there's some truth to that, but they still need to have their basics.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it is good to have that book learning, because that, like you were talking about with being well-rounded, like I love the knowledge that I can still pull from the Abeka curriculum, which was pretty intense, but it's good to have that baseline of,
right.
You're well-rounded, you're more informed, you can be articulate,
right.
But yeah, it's finding that balance of, you also have to have that physical side and that working side as well, especially for young men. Like, the boys love to work, Right. Like,
and there will come a day when it hurts more to mechanic or to buck hay or whatever they're doing. But yeah, they're definitely at a loving it stage right now.
Yeah,
but
I guess
if you just to look at some specifics, if you're up on your classic literature, even your text messages will read better.
Mm-hmm.
If you understand algebra, the news will make more sense. Just baseline, basic understanding of these things. You don't have to do advanced, algebra to be able to understand a headline. But when there's a graph and you need to see what the stock market's doing, or the housing market crashed, and what were the factors, and
realize, are we screwed, or are we really screwed?
Exactly. So
that goes into one of my questions I had written down. I want your opinion. Is this younger generation that, like, I'm a part of, do you see an overall good trend or an overall bad trend, or can you even make that statement? Because I acknowledge, from where I stand, one of the things that really grinds my gears is people saying your generation sucks and you're all a bunch of lazy sacks and stuff. Because from my personal experience, almost all the kids I went to high school with, or that I know, like, from growing up, they're all pursuing something.
Right.
Like, well, not all, but literally at least 90% of them are working hard. They're pursuing something. They're not just sitting around.
Right.
But that could also just be the groups that I grew up with. So what's your take on that?
And I was just going to say something similar to that, because like you say, we tend to live in our bubble.
Yeah.
And really only see what we're exposed to. I don't know any of our kids' friends that are out of work, that are, slacking in their work, anything like that. I'm really impressed by the kids I'm around. That being said, I watch the news and I see, climate activists throwing red paint on a woolly mammoth in the Canadian Natural History Museum, or I see climate activists, largely these young kids, trashing a Jewish memorial in Germany, and I don't understand. I don't understand their point of view and what they're trying to convey.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's that our society has reached a level of opulence that we have that time and the resources available to go off on these crazy tangents, or I don't know if I'm just not well communicated with and I'm not understanding what they're trying to say. But I definitely see both sides of the generation. I see cities burned down out of frustration, um, some of which is probably genuine, but that's not the right way to convey or to move past that frustration.
Yeah.
And then I see kids that are going to work and doing a great job and learning and spiritually growing. So overall, I would say every generation has said the next one is failing miserably, and they were the last of the solid, societies. So
Yeah. I'm part of the greatest generation.
Yeah, exactly. I think there are generations that have accomplished amazing things. You throw out something like Greatest Generation. Obviously, it's reminiscent of the World War II generation and the way they ramped up manufacturing and the sacrifice they made. Yeah, that's next level.
Yeah.
And then you look at the generation immediately following, late 50s through the 60s, and there's definitely, there were some social gains, but obviously some social slipping as well. So
yeah, that was what I told one of the dudes at work that started railing on about my generation and all that.
Right.
I gave him my spiel about all the kids I know are working hard and all that. But I told him, I said, I understand it's just what we do when we get old is blame the younger generation. Exactly. I said, I'm fully aware when I'm your age, I'm going to say the exact same thing.
Get off my lawn.
Yeah. It is kind of funny how that happens. Or why. Because it does seem to be a recurring theme.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why. Do you know why, or do you have any inkling why?
Because I'm better than you.
Yeah. I guess it could be I've reached this point in life where I've gathered all this knowledge. You're young. You don't know anything. Therefore, any problems must be your fault, perhaps.
And our rose-colored glasses glossing over the mistakes we made. That's like, well, I was never that dumb. How could that kid not know such and such?
When I was your age, we didn't have OSHA, and we worked
exactly.
25 hours a day, and yeah.
Yep. Yes, so it's a natural thing, but you look at productivity, you look at cultural wealth, you look at all these things, and it's
Fern.
Not even incremental.
Fern. Hey. Fern. No. My wife is here, everyone.
Sorry, guys.
She's disturbing the dog.
Which leads me to my next question. What should young men be looking for in a woman?
I'll wait till Abby's gone and then we'll talk.
I just gave her a...
I'm giving her more. Shut her up.
We'll see, Abs. Spiritually matching, first and foremost. You can work on all the other things, but you're not going to save this person. You're not going to, bring them up or anything like that. You need to be on a spiritually similar path. So that first and foremost. Obviously, it's easier if you get along, things like that. But then there's people with arranged marriages that last for 80 years. So
yeah,
you can choose to get along. You can choose to build a relationship. But spiritually, you have to be on the same page.
Yeah. Because I would say whether you're a Christian or not, your spirituality takes that top priority in your hierarchy, whether you admit it or not. Perhaps is that an incorrect statement?
That, but
at least in a relationship sense.
I could easily see that coming into play. I wouldn't say it's necessarily across the board, because someone that fancies themselves a New Age spiritualist could probably relate just fine with a Hindu or a religion that wasn't counter to that.
I guess more on, maybe I worded that wrong. in determining the subcategories below that. Do you think? Whereas, like, for us, our belief in the Bible, everything below that ties back into that top category. Maybe I'm speaking incorrectly, but to just play it out, if, say, you didn't believe in God, any subcategories below that would have to adhere to that category, whereas, I don't know.
I don't know. I think if you're an agnostic, you could, hold. Yeah, I'm trying to enunciate what you're trying to say, and I'm not sure if I'm doing any better at it.
I would have to think about that more.
I think that it tying directly together is going to be definitely if you're a Christian. I'm not a Muslim, but I could see, they have very strongly held beliefs that affects a lot of areas in their life. I think they would have to build a hierarchical, order in their belief system like that. But a lot of postmodern people, their spiritual beliefs, I don't think they necessarily would tie in to the rest of their order in their lives. I've even seen it in people that have taken, quote unquote religious occupations, but they didn't necessarily believe it per se.
Yeah. Maybe I'll have to think.
And
about
I could
that
be
more.
misunderstanding what you were.
No, I think I'm conveying it incorrectly. I'll have to think about it more. But yeah, that was I don't know if we talked about it on here or if I talked about it with a buddy, where you want them to be a Christian foremost if you're a Christian, because everything hinges on that.
Yeah, do not be unequally yoked. It's pretty plainly laid out.
Yeah.
There's some things in the Bible that are like, oh yeah, that could go this way or it could go that way. Excuse me, but don't be unequally yoked is pretty plainly laid out.
Yeah. But and then having the same, being similar in what you enjoy and like similar values, where most of your values should align if you're both Christians. But whereas if you have different personalities, you can still make it work. It'll just, I think it was on here. You can still make it work, but it'll just take more work. Where, like, right. For instance, with Abby, I brought up Abby, where we're pretty similar. So, like, our marriage is pretty darn easy. Like, it's not all roses and rainbows all the time, but, like, it's pretty easy when you look at other people in relationships where they are constantly butting heads. Whereas you can make it work, but because Abby and I are on the same page on most things, we get to skip a lot of steps of working out these little sub narratives, and we can put our attention on more important categories.
Right. I've heard elder, statesmen in the church, so to speak, say that they have very, very little in common with their wives. Obviously spiritually they align, and everything else, the wife may be really invested in the home. She may have very specific decorating ideas. She may not be at all interested in hunting or racing cars or whatever, video gaming, whatever that man is into. But they can, on an emotional and spiritual level connect, and they just, kind of let everything else categorize.
Yeah.
And, you let the wife have her living room decorated the way she wants it, and she lets you go on your hunting trips, and you don't push too hard to have her enjoy that hunting trip.
Yeah.
Because she just won't.
Yeah.
So it certainly doesn't hurt if you share interests, but I wouldn't say it's absolutely necessary.
No, and that's not what I was saying.
Right. I'm just.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
saying you don't need to go hang out at the shotgun club and
Yeah.
wait for a single lady that's also a Christian
You
and
might be waiting a while.
likes red Fords to show up. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Well, that's all that I had. Ask, I guess. I don't know. It's my first time or second time now being an interviewer. So
Yeah. And the last time, I can say we had completely different conversations this time.
100%.
I don't feel
yeah.
like we even hardly touched on any of the same
No.
points.
Oh,
but,
that was. Why don't you talk about the biblical citizenship a little bit?
Oh, that's very interesting, and it's currently very near and dear to my heart. So we just took a course, Nate and Luke and I, that was hosted by our church, and it's a course called Biblical Citizenship. It's presented mostly by a guy named Rick Green, who was I think he was a congressman in Texas. He was a representative of some sort, and then David Barton and Tim Barton, his son, was involved too. But they go through, and basically what they're doing is just saying from a biblical standpoint, with a biblical worldview, and it's amazing in this postmodern world we're living in. A biblical worldview is a rarity. Even you walk into the church and you just start ticking off the discussion points. Most people are not going to have a true, all the way lined up biblical worldview. So what this class was about was, what were the founding fathers thinking when they wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights after the Constitution, and why did the states ratify it, and how, what was their point of view, what was their thinking? Not, oh, the Constitution is a living document and these words don't mean at all what they mean, 240 years later, like some of the courts that are real activist judges, and they want to say, oh, that doesn't mean, the general welfare means that the federal government needs to take care of everybody in the country. They just need to write blank checks for social programs. That is not even remotely what the founders meant when they said general welfare. So it just was a fascinating class. They looked into original intent. They read from the Federalist Papers. Obviously, the Federalist Papers was months of years really, of discussion and correspondence. So in an 8-week course where each week is about an hour and a half, 2 hours, we're not going to cover all of that original documentation. But when you look at what the founding fathers were basing things off of, it was the Bible and philosophers and judges and lawyers that were basing their beliefs in the Bible or a biblical worldview. And there was some Greek philosophy in there too. That I would say the Greek philosophy is where they veered farthest from a biblical source, but it didn't disagree with a biblical worldview.
Yeah.
So, maybe it was a little humanist in its interpretation or its delivery, but it didn't contradict a biblical worldview. So, it was just really eye-opening, because I've always enjoyed history, especially American history, and thought I had a pretty good grasp of who believed what and why things were written the way they were written. But this class was eye-opening, and I've continued to watch, more and more of their presentations even after the class. So
and you find them on YouTube?
Yeah,
or something?
exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there's the Biblical Citizenship course where they kind of coalesced a bunch of different things together, and then there's the Constitution Alive is another more expansive course that Rick Green and David Barton did together. And David and Tim Barton have a museum down in Texas where I really wish we'd have known about it when we went to Texas last year, because just thousands of original documents, piles of early manuscripts and
Oh, that
just
would have been cool.
and everything down to muskets and rifles that were
Yeah.
used in the Revolutionary War. And so anyway, just fascinating stuff. And I want to host some of these classes here locally, this side of the valley, maybe get some more families, because everybody that I've told about it, they might be just trying to make me shut up and stop explaining and telling them about it. But most people that I've mentioned it to have been like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that sort of a curriculum was available. I'd like to go to one of those. And
It'd be
so-
interesting because I don't know if I learned it in school, but it's
I
in my
thought I
mind
had.
that it was told. Well, it's in my mind that I was told after the fact they weren't Christians.
That's a really, I would say 1940s on. Either they were deists or they were agnostics, or these things. A deist believes, yes, there's some kind of power out there, but I can't know details about it, and it won't necessarily interact in the affairs of men. Where these guys, I mean, you read down through, and I should have looked up the quote ahead of time, but Benjamin Franklin, who most people agree is one of the less religious of the founding fathers, that was heavily involved in the Constitution, said the longer, and I'm paraphrasing, but said the longer I live, the more I believe and the more I see the hand of God interacting in the affairs of men.
Oh yeah.
And George Washington spent massive amounts of time in prayer in conditions that weren't conducive to going off by himself and kneeling and praying. But, it was something that he completely prioritized. Andrew Jackson said it was vastly important that the country maintained a Christian viewpoint. I mean, all these people that there's no way to read their writings and then portray them as a deist.
Yeah.
It's straight up revisionist, falsifying history to try and claim that deism was a commonly held belief in those founding fathers. So it's just fascinating to read through. So that book that we got in the Biblical Citizenship has a book inside it that is the Constitution in kind of a modern, interpretation or language, and then the original text. But that modern language isn't rewritten to say that, the general welfare means that we need to have a lot of social programs. It's rewritten using modern terminology to try to maintain the original intent.
It's like different versions of the Bible,
It
or like
is,
translations
yeah.
where
Exactly.
it's not changing the meaning of it. It's just
Right.
using terms that we use.
Right. And so the Constitution really is a living document in the fact that we can, amend it. And so the states can get together, or Congress with a large enough majority can pass amendments. We can prohibit alcohol, and then we can decide that didn't work very well, and we can unprohibit it. But there's these different things that we can do to change it. It's not completely set in stone, but the bar to change it is high enough that you can't just trample over. It's not two wolves and one sheep voting on what's for dinner, kind of like it is when we pass a lot of the lower level laws and administrative rules. And that's the trouble with a pure democracy. Any kind of a mob rule like that, it's not representative of the other 49% necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
So the founding fathers just have my extreme respect in the way, not to say that it's faultless. It was still conceived by men, but it was so strongly built on biblical principles and just inspired. That being said, the whole biblical citizenship rolls into the Constitution is a document that governs a society that is moral, and it isn't strong enough. It's not iron-handed enough to govern a society that is immoral. And so I'm hopeful that as this pendulum swings, that we won't chase opulence and immorality so far that our country will cease to be because of it, or will change so much that we won't have our freedoms. But we do have the responsibility of as people with a biblical worldview, we have to vote, and not just in big important elections. We have to sacrifice and go hold offices. We have these responsibilities, these duties, not what we ought to do, but what we have to do to maintain a society that looks anything like what we've enjoyed for the last 250 years. So it's inspiring.
Yeah. As a straight white guy, that's the only opinion I'd expect from you.
Yeah, I definitely check a lot of the boxes, but
no, yeah,
I own one gun too.
Yeah.
So,
no, yeah, it's very. I'd be interested in it if you were to host it at the church or something.
Right.
Because it's especially as it becomes more and more popular to frown upon the founding fathers and to frown upon the Constitution. As that voice gets stronger, I think it would be good for us to become aware of the truths from that applied to the founding fathers and the Constitution. And is it really all bad? Is the Constitution really bad? Or is it actually working out well for us? And did they actually set it up for us to, like, with slavery? Did they set it up to amend that later when the nation was more stable and could address it at that point? Whereas if they would have, at least this is how I've been told. I haven't taken the course or anything. It's been a while, but I was under the understanding that they didn't address that at that moment because of how already weak the ties between the colonies were at that moment. Right. To make such a giant change could have very easily alienated half of the colonies, and we could have become two different nations at that point.
Or state colonies of European. Yeah, and obviously not in the least bit to justify slavery, but the malarkey, for lack of a better word, of things like the 1619 Project and some of these just straight propaganda pieces that are saying that the only reason America exists is because of slavery. The people of Plymouth, I shouldn't just spout dates because I'll get them wrong, but early on, when a slave ship landed, they actually arrested the slave traders, freed the slaves that they had brought, and, race was not a factor, anything else. It was, we don't believe in enslaving other people. And so then, now Jamestown played out a little bit differently, and they did enslave people. They were not all from Africa, and it'd be really interesting sometime to dive into to slavery over the years throughout history, because slavery has been a human problem as long as humans have been around. So usually, if your country or your city-state was conquered by another, you had two options. You were either going to get executed or you were going to get put into some kind of servitude or slavery.
Yeah.
And so, slavery's been a thing, usually white on white or brown on brown, or sometimes white on black. It was whoever was on the losing end at the time. And so, America really, even though there were obvious atrocities and shortcomings from the get-go, by having that biblical worldview, slavery was frowned upon by more than it was not.
Yeah.
And so it was always, America was always at that cutting edge of being the most progressive toward eliminating slavery. You look at South America, you look at North Africa, you look at Europe, you look at Asia. Asia was off the charts in the slavery through the millennia. And America is really this, with the obvious caveats, this shining star of trying to eliminate slavery. So, contrary to some of our modern,
Yeah.
story that's trying to be wove. But anyway.
Yeah, and in the fact that using that same document that allegedly was so bad to abolish slavery,
Right.
and continue to maintain that institution through that transition, that's a testament to it as well.
And tens of thousands of Americans sacrificing their lives
Yes, yeah.
in a struggle to do that.
Yes.
So, it's an inspiring class.
Yeah, I'd be interested in it. Well, I think we'll wrap her up there. So thank you to all 5 of you who are still with us. And enjoy the opportunity to do this. And maybe we'll have Mr. Kimmel on.
Thanks for having me on.
Some other time. Yeah,
I'll
thanks for
do
coming
some
on.
homework on one of these days.
Sounds good. All right.